Antarctica is often called a lifeless wilderness, but Russian teams recently uncovered evidence that suggests otherwise.
Antarctica is the last frontier. It holds our imagination. Old maps that said, "Here be monsters."
They have found things in the darkness that scientists are still struggling to explain. For decades, the world agreed to keep this place protected, but that promise is starting to feel very fragile. But here is the catch. The deeper they look, the more they find life and resources that should not exist in such a cold place.
Russia has reportedly found huge oil deposits in Antarctica.
This is not just about ice anymore. It is about who owns the last frontier on our planet. Hidden energy wealth. Under the ice. Antarctica matters because it is the only continent legally treated as a shared laboratory, not a prize. It is locked into an unusual rulebook that began with the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959 and active since 1961. Today it includes 58 parties that agree the region should stay peaceful and open to science. That promise became stricter in 1991 when the Protocol on Environmental Protection set a clear line. Any activity tied to mineral resources other than scientific research is prohibited. In plain terms, the continent can be studied, but it cannot be mined, drilled, or carved into an energy frontier. Then 2024 arrives and the story sharpens. Russia runs seismic surveys, a method that listens to echoes beneath the ice to map hidden layers, and officials describe the work as research. Outside observers hear something else. This is a key detail. It feels like a test of how far a country can push without crossing the treaty boundary, especially when survey areas overlap with long-standing territorial claims. This is why the tension feels global, not local. If one major power turns science into a pathway for future extraction, every signature on the agreement becomes a question, and every quiet season in Antarctica starts to look like a countdown. In May, debates spilled into committees and press briefings with officials promising compliance, while critics pointed to sanctioned ships and the pressure of energy politics. So, what did those signals suggest? And why did they alarm governments that rarely agree on anything, even in peacetime formal meetings? Antarctica is not just cold, it is protected by design, which is why the idea of oil beneath its ice feels like a locked door suddenly rattling. The rules are clear. The Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty bans any activity relating to mineral resources except scientific research. So drilling is meant to stay off the table no matter how tempting the geology looks. In May 2024, that temptation hit the news cycle. Reports said Russia had carried out seismic surveys in waters associated with the British Antarctic Territory, and that the signals pointed to an enormous oil and gas potential. One widely cited figure was about 511 billion barrels of oil, framed as roughly 10 times the total output of the North Sea over the past 50 years. This is exactly why people who normally ignore Antarctic politics suddenly paid attention. Here is the quiet detail that makes the headline dangerous. A seismic survey is not a shovel, but it is a map. And maps create momentum. The moment a number like 511 billion enters public debate, it becomes a talking point in parliaments, newsrooms, and boardrooms, even if the estimate is uncertain and the oil may never be produced. It is the difference between a rumor and a target. Seismic surveys do not pump oil, but they do something almost as powerful. They reduce doubt. A vessel tows instruments. Sound waves travel through water and rock, and echoes return like a coded message, letting geologists sketch layers they cannot see. Russia described the work as science, yet critics argued that the same method is often the first step in commercial exploration, because it turns wilderness into a catalog of prospects. The location makes the story sharper. The British Antarctic Territory is claimed by the United Kingdom, and overlapping claims exist from Argentina and Chile, even though the treaty system freezes sovereignty disputes in practice. When a new player appears with data that hints at a prize, the question is not only about barrels, it is about precedent. If one country normalizes resource-style surveying, others can follow while still saying they are only collecting knowledge. This is why the dispute spread beyond Antarctica. In 2024, a United Kingdom parliamentary committee examined whether Russia might be edging toward prohibited mining, And outside suspicion rose further after the United States sanctioned Russia's flagship polar research vessel, the academic Alexander Karpinski. Official statements tried to cool the story, but the attention did not disappear because the data had already entered the political bloodstream. This is where the numbers become a weapon. 511 billion barrels is so large that people start talking in shortcuts like energy independence, market shock, and a new era of power. Even though the legal barrier remains, it becomes a story about scarcity and pressure, because the world still runs on oil, and every major producer watches the future like a chessboard. Yet, the treaty framework was built for exactly this moment. It was designed to keep Antarctica peaceful and to prevent a rush that could trigger conflict in a region with no permanent population and almost no policing. The problem is that law can be steady while politics is restless, and surveys can happen quietly long before drills ever arrive. So the first fear is not a rig on the horizon. It is the slow change in what feels acceptable for profit, prestige, and strategic advantage. If the ice is hiding a fortune and the treaty is the lock, how long before someone decides that the lock is optional? Nobody expected this to happen, but there are still many rumors on the air about what lies even deeper. Something is moving beneath the ice that no one can explain. Strange creatures swarming in total darkness. Antarctica looks like a blank page from space, yet the Ross Ice Shelf hides a coastline that never sees daylight. Scientists have suspected for years that meltwater and seawater mix beneath the shelf, but proving it meant drilling through hundreds of feet of ice and sending cameras into a place no human can reach. A New Zealand-led team did exactly that, and what they recorded broke the idea of a sterile underworld. After drilling about 1,640 feet down, they lowered a camera into a vast cavity where currents moved like a slow river, and the ceiling above was solid ice. Within moments, the video filled with motion as hundreds of amphipods, small shrimp-like creatures, swarmed the lens and clung to the walls. The shock was not only that animals were present, but that the habitat seemed to function on its own. There is no sunlight under an ice shelf, so there is no normal food chain driven by plants. Yet life still finds a path. Researchers describe the site as an estuary-like environment where fresh water can meet salt water, and that mixing can carry minerals and nutrients that feed microbes. Once microbes exist, tiny grazers can follow. And once grazers arrive, a larger web can begin. This is where the story turns from strange to important, because the ice shelf is not just scenery. It is a roof over a hidden ocean. And under that roof, the rules change. Temperatures stay near freezing, pressure rises, and seasons barely matter, but the system can still breathe through water movement and chemistry. Research under the Ross Ice Shelf has found communities of microbes thriving in cold, dark, low-energy water, which supports the idea that larger animals could be fed by a deeper chain of microbial life. For viewers, distance is the detail that makes the discovery hit harder. Reports described the drilling site as hundreds of miles from the ice shelf edge, meaning the animals were living deep inside a sealed cavity, not drifting in by accident from the open sea. That suggests a resident population that has adapted to darkness, silence, and a ceiling that never melts away. Now pause and decode what that implies. If complex life can persist beneath Antarctic ice, then the limits we place on habitability shrink fast. Oceans under ice are not only an Earth story, they are a solar system story, because moons like Europa and Enceladus are known for having ice shells over liquid water. The Ross Ice Shelf is not the same world, but it is a living example of biology coping without light, using chemistry and currents instead of sunshine. It also hints that ice is not a barrier. It is a filter, and what passes through might surprise us again soon. Yet there is also an immediate warning. Antarctica is protected for science, but science can reveal value that other forces want to claim, and living ecosystems raise the moral stakes. If an under-ice habitat can exist and stay stable for long periods, then any future rush for resources or strategic advantage risks damaging a world that took ages to assemble. The next question is not whether life exists down there, because the camera already answered that. The question is what the ice itself is doing, because when Antarctica begins to shift and fracture, it can change the fate of everything living below. It is not that simple, though. as the very ground beneath their feet has begun to make noise. The ice is beginning to sing a very different song, low tones humming from the frozen deep. Antarctica's glaciers are not silent, and the Ross Ice Shelf proves it with a sound you cannot hear without instruments. Winds sweep across the shelf surface and over hard snow ridges. Then the ice responds with low-frequency vibrations like a giant drum that never fully stops. Seismometers planted in the snow pick up these tones. And when researchers speed the signals up, the result is an eerie song that turns a frozen landscape into something that feels alive. This is not a ghost story. It is physics you can measure. Studies describe how wind moving across dune-like shapes can make the surface vibrate, and the pitch changes with the wind. That means the shelf produces a near-constant pattern that scientists can track, and that pattern becomes a baseline. The normal voice of the ice decodes why this matters. When ice shifts, cracks, or slowly weakens, its vibration can change, just like a guitar string sounds different when it loosens. Researchers have shown that ambient seismic noise on the Ross Ice Shelf responds to environmental forcing. So the shelf's music can carry clues about conditions on and within the ice. The goal is not to enjoy the sound, but to use it as a live readout of stress. The stakes are huge because an ice shelf is a gatekeeper. It floats, so its melting does not directly raise sea level, but it holds back glaciers that sit on land behind it. If a shelf thins or breaks apart, that buttressing weakens, and inland ice can accelerate into the ocean. Scientists have seen this kind of speed up after major shelf collapses elsewhere in Antarctica, which is why they treat stability like a global issue, not a local one. Climate change adds pressure from more than one direction. Warmer ocean water can melt shelves from below, and warmer air can increase surface melt and help cracks spread. So the structure is attacked from the underside and from above. Researchers also warned that the waters beneath shelves are hard to observe, which creates uncertainty about how fast future change could unfold. This is where the singing becomes practical. Seismic listening works in darkness, storms, and long polar nights, and it can run for months with little human presence. If the tones drift, if new rhythms appear, or if the signal becomes messy, scientists can compare those shifts with winds, tides, ocean swell, and known fracture zones. Ross studies also show that ocean-driven forcing can overlap with the seismic hum, linking the sound to the forces that flex the shelf. From 2014 to 2017, a seismic array on the shelf captured continuous tones and helped researchers link them to surface snowforms, showing how listening can reveal changes even when satellites see only white. Imagine a sensor buried under snow, sending back a steady pattern for weeks, then showing a sudden change that does not match the usual weather. That is the moment researchers lean in, because it might be a small rift opening or an edge responding to stress. The shelf does not collapse in 1 second. It creeps, bends, and complains. And the vibrations can reveal that story early in time. So the real question is not whether the ice is singing. It is what the song is trying to tell us. If the melody turns chaotic, will the world treat it as a warning, or will it be dismissed as background noise until a break becomes impossible to ignore? See, the wind does more than just sing. It carves shapes that defy explanation. Strange shadows are appearing on satellite maps from the east. Geometric shapes carved by violent winds. The strange part about Antarctica is that it can look empty while hiding shapes that feel designed. In late 2016, satellite imagery shared online showed a smooth, almost perfectly oval feature in East Antarctica, and people instantly argued over what they were seeing. Reports described the formation as about 390 feet across, which is large enough to be noticed, yet small enough to seem deliberate, like a stamp pressed into snow. From a distance, the oval looks clean and symmetrical, and that is what makes it unsettling. Natural landscapes usually repeat with messier edges, so the human brain jumps to familiar stories. An ancient structure, a buried facility, a lost chapter of history under ice. The internet did what it always does. It filled the silence with certainty, even though a single image cannot prove intent. Now pause and decode what scientists point to when they hear those claims. East Antarctica is ruled by wind, especially katabatic winds that rush downslope from the high interior toward the coast. These winds can be persistent and strong, and over time, they sculpt the surface into ridges and dunes called sastrugi, carving sharp forms the way water carves rock. Wind can also create broad patterns that look almost geometric from space. Research on the East Antarctic Plateau describes glazed or wind-scoured areas and long snow dunes shaped by persistent katabatic flow. And satellite observations show that these features can form bands, edges, and smooth patches that stand out strongly against surrounding snow. Here is how researchers try to separate a real structure from a surface illusion. They compare images from different dates and different sensors looking for the same outline in other seasons, because a true object should cast consistent shadows and resist being erased by the next storm. They also use radar, which can see through snow layers and reveal whether the pattern has depth or is only texture. Until that kind of cross-check happens, an oval is a question mark, not a conclusion. So an oval is not impossible. If the wind direction stays steady and the local terrain has a gentle dome or a subtle slope change, snow can be removed in one zone and piled in another, leaving a boundary that looks sharp. Add sunlight angles, shadows, and the way satellites enhance contrast, and a natural feature can start to resemble a constructed outline. The unsettling part is that nature can mimic design when it repeats the same force for long enough. Still, it is fair to admit what remains unresolved. The oval in that image does not look like the usual long sastrugi ridges, and it does not match the wide striped look of dunes either. That is why it keeps returning as a mystery clip in videos. A single snapshot gives no timeline, so nobody can tell if the shape lasted for years, appeared after one storm season, or vanished the next week under fresh snow. The most honest takeaway is simple. Antarctica makes strange art because it is a place where one force dominates. And when wind and ice get enough time, they can sketch forms that feel too perfect for comfort. Yet comfort is not the goal of science. And the real question is, what else satellites might be missing when the surface itself can trick our eyes? And in Antarctica, the unknown often arrives without a warning. If one oval can ignite so many theories, what happens when the next image shows something that cannot be explained so easily? Yeah, about that. The myths are starting to sound like actual history. Real history is even scarier than the ghost stories. Ancient myths meeting. Harsh scientific truth. Antarctica attracts legends because it is the perfect blank space, and blank spaces invite people to fill them. When a continent is larger than Europe, covered by ice up to 2 miles thick and protected by distance, even ordinary facts can feel classified. That is how real science and wild storytelling start to overlap, especially online. One story begins with Atlantis. In Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Atlantis is described as a powerful island society that collapses after earthquakes and floods, disappearing in a single day and night. The message is a warning about pride and power, not a map you can follow. Modern writers often treat it as a philosophical invention, but in the case of Antarctica, the mystery feels more physical. Yet, the name still travels because it offers a simple thrill, a lost civilization erased by nature, waiting to be rediscovered. Antarctica becomes part of that fantasy for a reason that is real. Scientists have uncovered fossil evidence of forests that grew in Antarctica around 56 million years ago. Other research describes warm, humid climates during parts of the Eocene. When people hear that, some leap straight to cities and temples. Even though ancient plants do not imply human ruins, a true fact becomes a launchpad for a bigger myth. But here is the catch. Some researchers point to the Piri Reis map, a document from 1513 that appears to show the coastline of Antarctica without any ice. This creates a massive problem for the standard timeline of history, because the continent has been frozen for millions of years. This leads to one of the wildest theories out there, that an advanced civilization mapped the world before the ice arrived. If this is true, we are not looking at a frozen wasteland, but a massive archive of human history that was frozen solid in a matter of days. The crazy part is that this theory suggests the Earth's crust once shifted suddenly, moving a tropical paradise into the polar circle and eliminating everyone instantly. This would mean that under the ice sheets, there could be perfectly preserved cities and libraries waiting to be found. Then there is the Nazi base rumor, which feels convincing because it borrows real history. Nazi Germany did send an Antarctic expedition in 1938 and 1939, led by Alfred Richer, aboard the ship Schwabenland, and its goals were tied to whaling and mapping. That expedition later fed stories about a secret fortress in New Swabia, but scholars have examined the claims and described the hidden base as myth rather than evidence. Still, the story gets weirder when you look at Operation High Jump. In 1946, just after the war, the United States sent a massive fleet to Antarctica. We are talking about 13 ships, several planes, and over 4,700 men. Officially, it was a training exercise. Basically, critics ask why you would send an entire army to the most remote place on Earth to look at snow. Wild theories suggest they were actually searching for the remnants of that German base, and some even claim the mission ended early because they encountered craft that could fly out of the water at incredible speeds. The story does not stop at secret bases. Some believe that Antarctica is the site of a massive gravity anomaly that points to something hidden deep within the Earth. The idea of a hollow Earth, or a world called Agartha, often centers on the poles. While science tells us the Earth has a solid core, some theorists look at satellite images and see what they describe as massive openings near the South Pole. They suggest these are entry points to a world that has its own sun and its own people. While it sounds like science fiction, the sheer volume of no-fly zones over certain parts of the ice only makes people more suspicious. They wonder if the world governments are hiding the fact that our planet is more like a shell than a solid rock. The final legend is darker, and it centers on a lake buried under ice. In 2012, Russian scientists confirmed they had penetrated Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake beneath nearly 2.5 miles of ice. That achievement raised real questions about microbes and what life can survive without sunlight. Science reporting focused on careful sampling and cautious interpretation, because that is where the data lives. Online, a new name spread faster than any lab result. Organism 46b, a creature said to attack researchers in the darkness. The theory is that this giant octopus was not just an animal, but a highly intelligent predator that could paralyze people with its mind. The problem is simple. Fact-checkers have traced the creature story as fiction, and there is no confirmed evidence that a large predator like that exists in Lake Vostok. The monster works as a symbol, but some still wonder if the mission was actually shut down, because they found something they could not control. Now, pause and decode why these stories keep converging on the same frozen place. Antarctica is expensive to reach and hard to film, so gaps in information stay open longer than they would elsewhere. A single dramatic image can circulate for years, while verification sits in journals and technical updates that most people never read. Even researchers can be misquoted when clips are shared without context. There is also a human pattern at work. Platforms reward the sharpest headline, and fear travels faster than nuance. So, legends get polished into content while caveats get cut. Over time, repetition makes the story feel familiar, and familiarity gets mistaken for truth. That is why the same continent can host peer-reviewed science on one screen and pure invention on the next. So, the fear is not only what might be under the ice, but how easily a mystery can grow when the setting is remote and white. And get this, some people believe that the massive neutrino detectors built deep in the ice are not just for studying space. The IceCube Neutrino Observatory is a huge project that uses the clear ice to catch signals from the edge of the universe. But the wilder side of the internet suggests these are actually communication relays, or even defensive weapons designed to track objects that shouldn't be there. They argue that the location is perfect because the ice acts as a natural shield, and the silence of the continent prevents any interference. It sounds crazy, for starters, until you realize how much money is being poured into projects that most people don't understand. Antarctica is not just ice and emptiness. It is a continent that keeps sending signals when the world wants quiet. In one corner, reports about huge oil potential collide with a legal wall built to stop extraction, and the tension alone can redraw alliances far beyond the polar circle. In another, cameras under the Ross ice shelf reveal life moving in darkness, proving that survival does not need sunlight to be real. Then, the ice itself speaks. Seismic sensors turn wind-driven vibrations into a steady hum. Scientists listen because a changing pattern can hint at stress before a dramatic break. Even the strange oval seen from space shows how easy it is for Antarctica to confuse the eye, and how quickly a mystery can grow when the setting is remote and hard to verify. What do you believe is really hidden beneath Antarctica's ice? Could a hidden world change our future? Please share your view in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to our channel.